different targets. This meeting is being recorded, which everyone heads up. I just got a pop-up. Okay, so the one thing that we've been trying to explore as a firm, and I've been working with a lot of organizations to push for, is how do you find an energy and a correlation between communications and fundraising? Because essentially what we're trying to communicate has to go into our fundraising efforts. So in a way, your narrative, your storytelling, the way you deliver any message to a donor, to a funder, is something to do with words, visuals, elements that connects to communication. So it's kind of important for both these departments to work together. So if you are working in an organization that has different departments for both of these things, something to keep in mind while we're going through the session is, can there be a synergy between the two departments? Can there be something where the fundraising team or the member can be more closely teaming up with the communication or a designer in your organization? It's something to think about as I take you all through this piece. Now, this visual out here is going to be our zoomed out takeaway that is going to help us start thinking about our own organizations once we leave the session. The first component is, every time we think of building a wardrobe for ourselves, we have a lot of clothes, etc. The first thing you start asking yourself is, who am I? What's my identity? What do I like wearing? What is my personality? Am I more outgoing? Am I a little more subdued? Do I like bright colors? There's a lot of like self kind of exploration to understand, what do I really represent? What is my identity? Once we know that, then we start shopping. So this is something that we've done over the years. Like, we just then go to the shop, and every time if you notice, you pick up a dress and you're like, oh, but that's so not me. And then you'll not pick it up, although you know it'll look good on somebody else. And then you start adding things to your cupboard. You add some things to your wardrobe. And then you pick on like pants, jeans, jackets, etc., etc. Because then you know what's your identity, and you have a whole beautiful wardrobe. Your cupboards are packed with clothes, different kinds of combinations, shoes, socks, everything, you name it. And then we have to pick and choose a couple of elements every time we go for an event. If there's someone's wedding, we will open our wardrobe, think about what the situation is, what is the setting, who are the people we're meeting, and then think about what kind of an outfit do I need to wear. And then I pick and choose and customize for that experience, so that I am the best version of myself and I connect with the people in that space. Now, think about when you go to, when you go for a road trip, think about when you go meet some friends, think about a cafe. Every situation, you would customize a different outfit. It's something that you would do subconsciously. Even if you wear only 3 shirts, you would pick which color you like for that day. This is the premise of how we're going to try customizing anything that we're communicating for our stakeholders. Right now, we're talking about our funders, our donors. Now, within this donor category, there are different types of funders. There are like these CSR orgs, they are heavily invested in targeted topics. There are individual philanthropists that you might be teaming up with. There are kind of goodwill donors who are just families who want to do quick donations, etc. You might have different strategies on who you reach out to. Now, how do we customize for that is something to think about, and something that I'm going to walk you all through. Now, just keep remembering these 3 pieces: your identity, what's your wardrobe, and what's the outfit of the day. So we call it the look of the day. So this way, you'll always remember what's my look of the day when you go back now and when you're preparing anything. Now, I'm going to start dissecting each of these pieces. Your identity, in a nutshell, how we describe it in the communication space, is what's that story? What's your narrative? What's your kahani about your organization, which is your brand, as well as your program? A lot of you guys might have multiple programs while are working on. What is the kahani of each program? That is like the core. Who am I, or what is my organization all about? And there's another element, which is a brand consolidation piece, which is everything to do with words and visuals and what is our system. I'm going to use less jargons as I go through this piece, don't worry. But right now, just think of it as, what is my brand? What does that consolidated brand look like and feel like? And and sound like. That becomes your organization's identity. Using that identity, we start building our wardrobe. Now, sometimes while you're building your wardrobe, you start learning about your identity. That also happens in a lot of situations. Similar, like you buy three shirts and you're like, yeah, this is so me. And then you start discovering your own self through that shirt or through that outfit, through that dress. So you can also work backwards sometimes. So it's not a rule that you need to know your identity at 100% before you start experiment with your wardrobe. In your wardrobe, what we put in our communications kind of a toolbox is something called a photo archive. I'm going to dissect each one, don't worry. Um, and you're also going to get this deck at the end. So for those who are just wanting to look and not take notes right now, don't worry about it. You're going to get the whole deck in hand after the presentation. You think about digital mediums and print mediums and what kind of materials will be useful for your organization. You think of like different avenues. So you have photo, you also start exploring video avenues, and you think of outcomes and impact and what do we do in terms of qualitative and quantitative information. These are all your elements in your wardrobe. Treat them as like your shirt, your pants, your socks, this. You have the whole set. The more options you have, the more kind of gamut of things you have in your wardrobe, you have more to play with when you start customizing your kit for your donor. Now, I'm going to start deep diving on each. There's a lot of words here, but don't worry, it's very simple. I'm going to first talk about your identity. The two components is the narrative, and this brand or brand system, brand consolidation is something that we recommend everybody must be focusing on figuring out how to do it in their own capacity. Now, in your narrative, which is your story, this is again mota moti. After this, I'm going to do another stage of deep dive where I'll dissect each component for you guys. In your narrative, essentially you'll need three versions. You'll need a super short version, which is a compact version. There's a different use case for that. Now, a lot of people know it as elevator pitch. It can be a compressed thing that you'll put in an emailer, etc., like a paragraph. And then you need a little mid-size version, which is a little meatier. That has a little more pieces. Now, what that is, I'm going to walk you through. But right now, just know that there is a short, there's a mid-size, and there's a long format. The long format is very useful for proposals, for like long format white paper docs, wherever you're trying to give more information to your donors, to your funders. Having these three versions is very, very important. Having just one version will put you in a lot of pressure because sometimes you'll have a long format, you'll not know how to strip it down to one paragraph. You'll always try cut pasting. In the process of cut pasting, you'll miss out a big component because you're in crunch time. You have to send something to a donor, you have to send a file, you have to send an email. That's why having these three handy is going to help your team feel very confident depending on the situation. Now, to create these, I'm going to give you all some zoom out pieces of how you, as an organization, start exploring how to create this. Either you can build these things or recreate or strengthen this narrative with your in-house team. So ideally, your founder, your CEO has a strong understanding of the organization because they've set it up from ground up. Or if you have any good writer in your team, spend time. I've written like how much time to allocate for each of these pieces. Ideally, if you have a 4 to 5 week attack sprint, you can get this in a strong place. Now that's your in-house strategy. Otherwise, you can do obviously two pieces of outsourcing. One is either work with a content writer, not a design, content writer for this, or you work with like a studio or a comms team externally, like my firm, whatever. A lot of firms like these, they work on these pieces that do a combination of writing and everything else. But these are your options. But ideally, your the amount of time you should be spending is like a 4 to 5 weeks guarantee. Don't try finishing it off in one session. You will not get to the finish line. The brand consolidation component is almost like a lot of people you guys might have heard of a brand manual. A lot of these corporate clients, etc., different organizations, FMCGs have something called a branding system, a brand manual. You can call it a brand toolbox, brand manual, kind of a guidelines, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. It should be there in whatever form. Now, a nutshell of this, which I will deep dive and give you all examples of what this could look like, is there are two parts to this brand piece. There's words and there's visuals. Now, as many guidelines and structures you can put for your organization for how do we speak, how do we write, how do we type, how do we use a hashtag, things we avoid saying, everything comes handy here. It's everything about words. The second vertical is around visual. Now, a lot of you guys might already have this piece. You might have worked with some designer, etc., for this, which is basically organizing all your visual elements. What is my color? What is my font? Now, it sounds straightforward, but when a team is in crunch time trying to build something, if you don't have this organized, you're going to have changes and differences in the way everything is experienced of your org. Having this system which is consolidated is fabulous. Now, in this, you can add more rules around photography, etc. I'll show you what that can look like. Now, in order to just script it out internally without thinking too much, if you sit together with your team, you can hash this out in about 2 to 3 weeks. And at the end of it, you can use, if you're working in-house, if you're working internally, you can put this together in a Google Slides deck or a Word doc, etc. It's very straightforward. I'm going to give you all some visual understanding of what this could look like, because this can vary from very complex ones and simple ones, but depending on which way your organization is moving, which direction it is, what stage it is in, you will have to custom build this. Now, once you know this is your identity, you start understanding all these materials and these components that can come together for your donor kit. The first thing which we completely list as a great to have, but not a need to have, is having a photo archive. Photographs are the quickest way to connect with a donor, with someone who has 30 seconds of your time. So making sure you have a good set of photographs, which is refreshed every season, every year, every quarter, is crucial. In your photo archive, pieces that will be handy, I've listed these things down. Later on, you all can think about this. Is great to have a combination of brand level photos. When you talk about the organization, who are we, what we do, etc. What should those photos look like? So we zoom out kind of a brand level photo. Have a combination with that and photos that highlight the program. Now, if you have on-ground program, take those photos on ground. If you have off-ground, more strategic interventions with government partnership, etc., think about what would help what will help a visual person understand what you're doing in those programs. Think about what those photos could look like. Think about bringing in your team photographs and your internal planning photos, because a lot of organizations, investors, etc., founders love to know your process of how do you go about designing your program, how do you go about structuring your game plan for your organization for the next 2 years, for 3 years. Capturing those photographs is important. Now, yes, you can actually do this in-house as well. If you know any team member, but do not have everybody take photos with any camera, any phone, etc., because then you get a dump of random photographs. You need to make sure you know who's a designated 2 or 3 members in your team who's actually capturing these photos or collecting these photos and prioritizing and organizing them. If you do not organize these photos into the right folders, etc., nobody's going to get to use them. Some of these things I'm going to touch upon sound very basic, but it's good time for right now for you all to refresh and reflect on what you all are doing at the moment in your organizations and how can you incorporate these practices. The other way of going about it is there are tons of freelance photographers who can come on targeted projects. You can get them on once a year or once in 2 years to do a targeted set of photographs. Now, when you all are approaching freelancers overall or approaching any kind of collaborators overall, I'm going to give you all like a few tips that I am suggesting on things to keep in mind when you're outsourcing anything after this slide. Right now, I'm just giving you ideas of how to go about it. Essentially, if you plan out about 4 to 5 weeks to choose, shoot, organize, and collate and collect these photos into folders, your team will be in a good place with that. So that's your photo archive. That translates into a lot of your print and digital material. I'm emphasizing on 2 different avenues because your donors and your funders are all interested in different mediums depending on the situation of your meeting. How do we customize this? I'm going to show you all at the end where there's a structure that I use when we go about a game plan for customizing. In print materials, essentially, this is your must-haves component which you need to have in your kit. Have like a brochure, whatever format, either it can be a 2-fold, 3-fold, 1-fold, whatever it is, have a quick, handy brochure, which is something you can just hand out. It could be combined with a pocketbook. A lot of people are now experimenting pocketbook. You can throw it in a bag. You can like keep it in your pocket, hand it over, walk people through this information. So it's nice to have these different form factors. Think about what form factors will work. Something that we've been working on with organizations is working with these flashcards. They're literally like your cue cards, but with visuals in it. So if you're trying to talk about 5 stories on ground or featuring some case studies, you can put a photograph at the back, there'll be a mini story out there. So they're literally like postcards. So when you go and speak to someone, you can have these cards handy. So you don't have to sift through like your manual report to show one, this is my case study, etc. You have that. So this way, you can keep switching up the medium depending on what the ask is and what the situation. So on top of that, obviously you'll work on an annual report, impact report. And this is where I'm just suggesting have a separate digital version, which is custom built for the digital experience. When I say digital experience, most of the people are looking on their iPads and their phones, mainly phones. So if you're having these spreads which are printouts, it's very hard to zoom in and zoom out. So no one's going to read through your information. So how do you custom build these information for your digital platform is crucial. Now, a lot of conversations are happening on WhatsApps and different kind of offbeat like mediums, which are not necessarily emails. How do you have things ready for that? So that means your PDF file may not work. How do you flip them into JPEG files? So simple things like that can get you thinking about what are my digital materials? Do I have a separate suite of digital materials ready to go? Because print materials are required for printer. Like when you send it for a printing, they have different kind of layouts, formats for printing. They are also a little heavier. So sharing it on an email is always going to be hard. So whoever you work with, whether you work in-house or work with anyone, make sure you have a super light under 1 MB, under 3 MB kind of a file ready to go for your emails, for your WhatsApps, etc. So you can share a digital series. In your digital space, obviously your website or any other kind of digital platform components work, like a mini info series for social media. Having these components are going to be useful for you. So have these stashed up. Now, how do you build these things? I'm just going to go into the print materials really quickly. There are a lot of things available online. I've been actually pushing a lot of organizations to start experimenting, building it by themselves. So Canva right now has invested heavily on how do we build brochures. There are preset templates that you can use for very simple, cheap prices. There are some purchasable things. There are free templates. There's also a file. There's also a software called Figma, which is a designing software. These are both very user-friendly software. You can actually you need not have any design background to work with these software. So working on print materials and digital materials using these platforms are great. You can also outsource them, but I would recommend if you're in a stage right now where you want something quick, you want something that is a 2-week job, 3-week job, do it by yourself using these platforms because it's going to be faster for you to execute it and get it going. If you have the time and the resource to invest in an outsourced project for these pieces, the way to go about it is think about a high return on investment material. So if you know your annual report is something everybody in your funder group looks at for your organization, invest only in that. If you know your brochure is something that is the thing, like everything happens in a print format because everything is on ground visit, invest in that. But do not start investing in all sorts of materials at the moment. Think about what you can take in-house and you can do it. It's very easy if you start working on simple fundamental rules based on your identity. The colors are used, the fonts are used, the shapes are used, etc. If you have good photographs, half your job is done. Your materials are going to pop based on the photograph. I'm going to show you all some examples of how these materials pop with photographs as well, but these are just things for you all to think about. Video has become a very, very interesting medium to communicate that experience that you can capture on ground. So a lot of you guys will be working on sensitive topics or topics that's very hard to explain and communicate through a text medium, through photographs. Think about whether you are ready to invest in a video medium. Even if you have one brand level video or one detailed kind of program 2-minute video that you invest in, you can use it for your entire funding cycle. And that's like a year-long exercise. Now, you can also use this video, and in a lot of organizations, the video that you make has an approximate shelf life, depending on how you all move as an organ, grow as an organization, of at least a year, year and a half, maybe two, depending on how versatile that video is. It's completely worth investing in it and thinking about components that it should cover. I've listed them down here. If you're keen on investing in it, these are definitely components that you should think about on how do you integrate them. There's always handy brand level info that you talk about. And you also mentioned the program details of specifics. It'll be great to bring out interviews from stakeholders as well as your beneficiaries. So having multi-stakeholders speaking into the camera or working with you on this project is damn interesting for funders, for CSR members, etc., because it gives a holistic 360 perspective on what's everybody's perception on your program and on your organization. The reach, outcomes, and impact is also very handy, which almost segues into the last part, which is the outcomes and impact. This is something we have started heavily investing in for organizations right now. This is something that all organizations are not spending time doing. Because it's hard to get quantitative information on the impact. A lot of our impact turns into outcomes, not really impact, because what we can talk about is how many places have we reached, how many organizations, how many beneficiaries we've reached, etc., etc. It's hard to talk about what is the change that's happened on ground, what is that measurable change. Now, a way to go about this is investing in qualitative impact stories, qualitative understanding of experiences across stakeholders and beneficiaries. Who does this kind of work? There are researchers that you can work with who do this kind of work, where they will go on ground if you have an on-ground project, or they will work with you and shadow you and study what you're working with and understand who are your beneficiaries / stakeholders, partners, and put that together into a story format. You combine that with photographs, you have a really powerful story that you can showcase to a lot of investors, funders, and they are caring about this, and you all know that already. The hardest part is to allocate time for this, because we assume that our program team is already going to do this on the side as they're building and delivering the program. It's important to allocate time of about 6 to 8 weeks, maybe part-time, where you have a designated member in your team or 2-3 members, or you work with an outsourced person who's a researcher to understand how do we invest in the visualizations of our data. You might have some basic reach data, quantitative data. How do you make it make sense and bring it to life for your funder? These can be built in isolation, and then you plug them into your print and digital materials. Similarly, if you have a lot of tables and graphs and spreadsheets, there are ways to make them look interesting as well as make more sense. It will help the funders connect with your data points. Again, I'm going to bring back Canva. They have invested heavily right now in the past 3 years or something in infographics, data visualization tools. So you have to literally plug your data, and it has a lot of options. You can customize it to your brand colors, your brand fonts, etc. And bam, bam, you have like reports ready. You can plug that into your digital materials, your print materials. You have your quality and quantity information laid out. Think about how you can use maps. Think about how you can use any format that can help people understand your reach, outcomes, and impact. This is where video helps, photos help, written stories help, graphs, plotters, etc. You must think of how do you invest in this at maybe a downtime time. Think about if you want to do, if you're already doing baseline endline studies, fabulous. How do you humanize that information? And that's where communication comes handy. How do you humanize it? How do you make it make sense for a person who has no idea what topic you're working in? These are the core essential pieces in your wardrobe. Once you start picking and investing in these components, if you already have these, start organizing them in these verticals. Think about what all do I already have? What all do I need? It could be your checklist. This slide out here is a great screenshot you all can take later on to just understand what all you need to invest in. I'm going to give you a couple of things to think about if and when you decide to outsource with anybody. The reason I'm bringing this up is I've over the years I've noticed these are major pain points that break projects, and you don't like what happens at the end of it. The first point: do we have a concrete execution timeline? Now, when I say concrete, I actually work on a Gantt chart, like a timeline, which is a day by day breakdown. So when I said a 4-week sprint to work on your brand consolidation, it will be a day by day. First week, what are we doing? Second week, what are we doing? Third week, what are we doing? Fridays, are we checking in? Have we slotted in those calendar invites? Every single thing. Whoever you work with, if you have that kind of a timeline spot on, it'll never spill over. The moment you don't have that, you just have an end goal, it's going to spill over by at least 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Then there'll be a Diwali break, then there'll be a Dasara break, something will happen, and then the CEO is traveling, etc. So you'll never have that final file, whatever topic you're working on. So make sure you have that timeline set. Your project outcomes, keep that very, very defined. So have a white paper doc that says this is our goal for this project. This is what we're intending to bring out through materials, through work, etc. Whatever. As far as everybody in the organization and involved in this project, as well as the team that you're working with, it's constantly referring back. So I have like this process where every Monday morning we refer back to what our goal for the project is, so that if it's a 5-week exercise, every Monday I know what the goal is, so we don't digress. Otherwise, your website will turn into something which will be a chat bot which you want to make, which will turn into like a live experience that you're trying to build, and your website will never get built. So think about what your goal is, what are you trying to achieve, and you line it out. Biggest question, which is crucial in the social impact space, is who's going to write and edit my content. If you work with anyone who's a freelancer, think about are you going to give the time to write, or is somebody else writing, editing, or are we just copy pasting? If you're trying to connect with a funder, I'm going to take you through the actual narrative process, structuring process, and you all can think about it then. But think about who's writing. It's very important that someone's taking control of that writing part. Fourth point, this is an empathy piece. Your project will not work that well if the people you're working with don't care about what you're doing. If they're just trying to beautify something, it'll never work beyond a certain degree. So if you're trying to build something which is crucial, like a pitch deck for your funder, for your big CSR client, make sure the person building it with you cares for what you're doing. They will give better suggestions for how to strengthen that pitch deck. Last one is who is managing the project. Have a point person from your end and a point person from whoever you're working with. I have intentionally gone super zoom out to talk about the overall ecosystem. ये अपना wardrobe है. These are all the things you have to build to some degree. The more you start structuring how do I go about this process, the more in control you will be for your fundraising efforts. Essentially, a lot of our fundraising is centered around our identity. And I'm going to walk you all through these two components, the narrative and the brand consolidation, in depth in the next 1 hour or less than that, 40 minutes. Taking a pause What I have spoken about right now is the zoom out umbrella. Think about what communications in the fundraising space is, what how it will come handy, what is the combination of writing, design, communications, and fundraising efforts do we need to think about in terms of overall zoom out pieces. We will now talk about how do we customize it, how do we structure the identity for our specific donors. Sounds good? Thumbs up if so far you're with me. Okay, fantastic. I'm going to jump into the fun part, the brand consolidation part. Um, there is no secret recipe for this in terms of is there a set way to build a branding system or a brand structure like this, the brand guidelines for my organization. You can go as deep as you want. You can have 100-page document of guidelines. You can have a 5-page document as guidelines. It depends on how much hand holding you want to do for your teams, for your outsourced people, etc., and how complex is your work. In the word space, there's a lot of work you can do. How we speak and how we write can be a combination of what your teams are also going to use when they are out there pitching to a funder, pitching to a donor. In the speech and the writing, there's tone, there's language, there's voice. You can be, you, there are a lot of organizations that have a very relaxed first person casual style of writing. There are organizations who work predominantly with government bodies who need to be very technical, who need to be very, very precise with the choice of words if they're doing strategic interventions, etc. Some organizations have a USP, which is an element of fun, friendliness in their language, choice of words, and in their voice itself, in their personality. Heroing that is important. So when we are writing, think about what your organization stands for. If you are the founder, if you're the CEO, think about what's your personality, because whether you like it or not, it is connected to your organization's personality. So it matters that you have that personality spot on. Once you understand what that personality is, put it on paper. Because if you don't put it on paper, your teams will not understand. They are going to take punts in the dark. Acha, maybe we'll write like this, and your head of comms or head of CEO, etc., would say, "Nay, I'm not feeling it," and you'll have no idea why you're not feeling it. That's why having more structured definitions of we are all about interpersonal connection. We want to stay humble. What does humility mean for us? Explain that to the best way possible. I'm going to give you an example for this in a minute. Other components in words could be things we avoid saying. For example, there are a lot like the very controversial kind of component is, are we using phrasings that are connected to low income communities or um, underprivileged children, low income community children? There are lots of different phrasings you can use. Some are accepted by your organization, some are accepted by the sector, by the society you're in. You have to think about the words you use, you don't use. Even as simple as equity or equality, which one are you always using and why there's a difference? It's important for your teams to know. That will solve and help you a lot when it comes to crunch time when you're pitching to funders, donors, CSR members, because that's where knowing the difference is going to come handy. So think about all the things that we must say, we don't say. If we're using any hashtags, etc., what would that look like on social media? It can go specific. Now, if you feel like you have only a 3% team, you don't need to go that specific right now. So don't waste time writing. Think about what is the fundamental core, who are we, what is our tone, etc., in this. In the visual space, very simple. Your logos, you'll have a logo, but think of all the versions of your logos you need. You need a PNG version, which is a transparent back. You need a JPEG version. You need a PDF version. You need a EPS, whatever formats you need. Have it all organized in one folder. Then you will have a black and white version, a color version, a white version. There'll be a lot of combinations depending on your organization and where all you'll use. The more you'll define the usage rules, this is the most simplest thing that goes wrong and makes your pitch decks and components just not look professional. You might know how to do this, but your team may not know how to do this, or the person you're outsourcing with may not know how to do this. Make sure you get that right. Similar to fonts, colors, think about, are you having backup fonts that works across computers? What is that backup font? Other little elements that can come handy here are things like photo guidelines. What is the kind of photography we like capture? Things we don't capture. We work in sensitive topic areas about women's health. We're not going to capture anything that has a negative connotation, anything that has a negative energy to it or an emotion attached. What does that mean? With example, that's useful for someone who's going out there to take photographs for your organization. I'm going to now share a couple of examples of what we've built in the past. The first one is an organization called Womanity Foundation. It's a global foundation, Swiss-based organization that predominantly works in women's rights and women's health and safety, and it's across multiple countries. And we were trying to organize this brand consolidation piece for them, and I'm going to walk you through what we've done for them really quickly. A lot of our work for them has been more writing centered, because when we're talking about topics that are sensitive around what's happening in Afghanistan to girls, etc., it's very important. So our words component. So I usually do build our decks into words and visuals because it's easy for our clients to also understand. These are the words pieces, these are the visual pieces. So in the words components, we wrote it like a story. Use our brand and program narrative documents as your starting point every time you're writing. So we have documents in a folder. Here's a link. First start there, and then don't start writing your own thing. And then we have explanations on what that means. And we've written what all programs we have. Make sure you go to the right document, etc., etc. Explain what humanity does in the way you would explain to your mom. I'm just giving examples of how we are communicating the words part. This is a brand consolidation piece where everybody starts streamlining the way they write, speak to funders, to partners, etc. How much info is too much info in an email, in this place, in that medium? We start explaining these pieces. This was a very sensitive thing for humanity, the difference between programs and projects. In के पास there was programs, under each program there were multiple projects, so you should not change the words. The moment you change it, it gets confusing to stakeholders. So this might sound very simple, but at the higher end, when you're speaking and when you have 30 seconds to explain what you do to a person in a lift or like in a cafe, you want to make sure your team and yourself, you know what you're talking about. So words, like we wanted to call out words. I'm just giving you a skim through, but you get a gist for what I'm saying. So we had like 10 big points in terms of words. So I'll just give you, we speak in first person. It makes our conversation feel more direct and personal. We focus on being approachable and relatable, and then we give examples. So I'm just giving you a gist for it. And in the visual space, we had a little more stripped down, simpler piece for them on how do you get the logo right. Things think in mind. What do you not do with the logo? What are the colors we do use? What's a basic font check sound like? Things that people can use, things that your teams can use while you all start building more components. So keywords for printing, for example, so that your team does not screw it up when they're in a printing deadline for a funder where they have to pitch a deck. Think about simple things like this. Now, this is the comms angle to fundraising efforts. Now, I'm going to give an example of what this means when you build a structure like this, when you have that brand consolidated like this, then you can start building components. I'm going to give you an example of a quick, we spoke about like brochures, like a 3-pager, etc. This is an example of, oops. Sorry, you're there. Can you see it? No, I think you guys can see it. Huh. With a woman in the front, right? With a white bandana. Huh. So this is a two-pager. It just folds. But you see, the palette is the same. We've used the right words wherever. So there's a lot of rules that we followed in terms of the tone, the way it's written, the photos we've chosen, etc., etc. And it helps us speed up the process when you're actually building a material for fundraising. Sorry. I'm going to give another example where this is a great example I want to share when sometimes we don't have enough photographs or we can't use the photographs due to ethical dilemmas and issues because you're working with areas that you don't have enough photos or you've not captured the right photos for a long time. There's a lot of cool things that you can do. You can use illustrations. So, for example, we wanted to talk about the work happening in Afghanistan with the Afghan girls. Now, we're not legally allowed to use photographs. We have great photographs. So how do we bring that story to life? So we have captured little quotes at the bottom. We have a little like illustration that suggests what we're talking about. It's about education and connected to kind of equipping them with the right tools to like study further. What does that mean? Right? I'm just giving all ideas of what you can do with like different mediums and think about how that comes together. Now you don't need to have a complex brand manual. You can have something very simple. I'll give an example of 3-to-1 Education Foundation. This was like years back, we had worked with them. So this was a very simple, like learn about our logo. How do we use it? Learn about our colors, typeface, patterns, more guidelines. Simple, 3 page, finish. Khatam. Because they wanted more effort and investment in the visual aspect. Now, ideally, it's better to also have the words aspect, but these guys were specific on like we want something very compact. But what this allows you to do is build an experience like this. This is like a quick portfolio case study where the things that we worked with them, we had these flashcards we built. So how does that little bird pop everywhere? This is the same thematic thing that we follow everywhere. We're building posters, we're building social media, we're building a website for funders, for partners specifically. So the aesthetic, the process, the how we write, everything is in it. Now, the biggest component that makes or breaks these things is uh, are we back on the deck? Yes. Okay. Is the narrative. Great. Uh, and check. Okay, we're on time. This is a more structured element. So now we have kind of covered the brand component, the brand consolidation, what it takes. Start thinking about what it means for you guys, for your specific organization. How deep in depth you need it, how simplified you need it. The narrative, according to me, in my experience, is 70% of your game changer for your funding effort, fundraising effort. If you get your narrative right with your other side of the identity, you are set. You will feel very confident even if you don't have the best looking deck, even if you don't have like a huge communications team to build beautiful collaterals, etc. That narrative is crucial. If you spot on, get your narrative right, your proposals are going to have a lot of depth. To break down our narrative, I'm going to talk about one phrase to think about. How do we stir the perfect cup of chai? That's your hook. The first hook I wanted you all to remember is identity. What's my wardrobe? And how do I customize it? The customize it I've not come to yet. I'm going to take you all at the end. I'm still working on the identity, right? So how do we stir the perfect cup of chai? Remember chai and stir. When we're crafting our narrative, the base chai ingredients must be chai powder, or milk, or water. The core ingredients is crucial in any format, however you mix. For us, it is the CHAI, chai. Your narrative needs to cover all these four components. It is not in a linear order. Ideally, you can move it as well as however you want. But I'm going to touch upon what each component is. What is the challenge? What is your organization trying to solve? Explain the problem in the space and the need of the hour. It has to have that sense of urgency. Investment is only made a lot of times based on how important and the need of our is crucial from a relative perspective of the funder, so donors priorities. But your job is to put that out there. What is the need of the hour? When we explain our challenge, we need to back it up with how are we solving for it exactly? How do we do it? That's your next big question. How do you do it? This is where you talk about your approach, your goal, your model, your theory of change, the exact interventions you're working on, the implementation process, the partnership breakdown if you're working with partners, and the capabilities of your org. Okay, now tell me what is the analysis you start. Now, this is where we talk about stats, qualitative, quantitative, outcomes, reach, impact. This is why, if you remember in the wardrobe, it's a key element. Spending time to capture this is important. The other parts you can sit right now and start writing, but the analysis part needs a little bit of digging around. You need to find data points, you need to find stories, and that's why having that ready in your wardrobe is crucial. What is the growth plan? All that is the give me the overall analysis of the situation, what's happening, what's not happening, etc. And the last big question, where do I fit in? What do you want from me? And this is from a donor's perspective. Where I'm asking you, where do I fit in? Any conversation, any pitch, we cannot leave it without a this is what I want from you. Now you can position it directly, indirectly, etc. The tone can change, the style can change, but you need to have a clear incentive, call to action, quote unquote, in your narrative. Now, again, remember, I'm talking about the white paper doc, the narrative. Once we build all this, we will fix it into a lot of the material. You have to customize it. But right now, I'm talking about the overall narrative. So think about what your incentives are. What is the sell? What is the ask? It's very important so that they leave. So even if you meet someone for a coffee, your friend, yeah, you're not asking for money, I get it. But you can just ask them for feedback. You can ask them about what do you think about my feedback? Any kind of soft touch contribution is relevant and informative because then it improves the stickiness of what you're doing in their brain. If you leave at a coffee shop after saying, this is what we do, and the person says, good for you, and walks away, they're not going to remember as much unless if you engage with them on like, so I was wondering, like, what do you think? Like, or just like, I'd love to know what you think. Like, simple, like, casual kind of a question. A nice little plug with that individual, whoever you're working with is going to be a good practice for everybody in your team to start kind of confidently asking about how do you fit it. When we're crafting the structure, there are four things to keep in mind. This is when we're stirring the chai to make it really nice. And the way we stir it, the way the chai wala like mixes it, sometimes adds a froth, adds a little bit of bubbles in it, all that stuff. Keeping it simple. Now, when I say simple, it's easy to understand, explain the process very simply. A lot of times you might know exactly what you're doing because you've been saying it for 1,000 times. But a person has no clue what your intervention is, what your model is. Keep it simple. The language, the word choice. If you even use the word intervention, you think about whether your exact stakeholder you're speaking to understands what that even means. Maybe they will put two and two together and guess what that means, but maybe they don't know what that means. Maybe they don't know what a sprint cycle is. Think about what they know and think about how do you customize the words and the explanation for them to keep it simple for them. Now, this is applicable across. Make the challenge simple. If you explain the challenge in an indirect way, there is no water and you're connecting that to gender roles and gender rights. I'm just giving an example. You have to show the connection. But you can see there's no water, so that's connected to sanitation challenges, which is connected to women not going out or women being forced to go out, etc., to use the washrooms, etc. There's a three-layer connection. How do you simplify the connection? So if you have a challenge you want to connect to your solution, how do you simplify it? It's very important. Keep it very tangible. What it means is it has to be believable. It has to be practical and logical. So if you have a 3% team and you say you're working in 15 states across 35 districts, it's going to not add up. But if you're actually doing that, explain how, make it believable. Talk, if you might have a many to many process, you might work with on ground partners. Sure, explain it. If you make it sound very not believable or not tangible, they'll get it. They'll get the problem. They'll get how do you do it, but they'll just not connect with it. Like this not make sense of. This is something a lot of you guys might be damn good at already because in our hearts we work with a lot of passion. Is how do we keep it inspiring? How do you show that the rigor, the motivation that you have as a team? One thing to keep in mind is it has to be inspiring from their angle, not necessarily from your angle. So you might get goosebumps every time you're thinking of cement and bricks, but it might not give them that goosebumps. So what will help them feel inspired? Why? What will get them energized to start engaging and supporting and working with you? This is a game changer. Every time you use a case study, example, anything you're using, make it relatable. If I'm a person who has no context of what's happening in a tier three or a little town or a village in MP or UP, help me connect with it. You might have a clear context of what's happening on ground. I might not even understand what's happening as a donor. How do I connect? Or similarly, if I don't understand what a government partnership means in your field, explain to me what that means. Make me understand and connect with the information. So the way we do this is every time we draft a narrative, before we work on any material, any collateral, print, digital, anything, we work on the narrative. When we work on the narrative, now if you already, I'm sure all you guys, most of you guys have a story. What you do next is not start from the scratch. What you do is do a rating. So for example, every time I work on this is my litmus test. So I will ask, is my challenge simple, tangible, inspiring, relatable? For example, I'll put a green if it is simple. I'll read my narrative and be like, हाँ simple तो है. Is it tangible? अरे tangibility मैंने नहीं लिखा है. I've not written that. Maybe the donor will have doubts about this. Is it relatable? हाँ, some parts are relatable. So similarly, how do you rate and critique each aspect of this for your narrative? That's a way to take it one step to the next level. So if you're planning to work on a website right now, for example, or a new pitch deck, this is going to make your pitch deck way more stronger. I would invest 70% of your time in the narrative. Again, zooming out, how do we make the perfect cup of chai? How do we stir the perfect cup of chai? Okay. Now, this is our structure for the narrative. We're going to touch upon now how do we customize it. But before that, I realized I had a nice example. I'm going to talk to you guys about a very cool organization. I love them. And I used to work with them a little bit for a project. They're called Toy Bank. Some of you guys might have heard of them. They basically work mainly in Maharashtra. And this is just my own personal, like I just love what they do. Basically, they work with children, and their hook is they are trying to um, help children work on their development through play. Play meaning khelna, play meaning smart play. There are different types of play in the actual play space. Now, something, okay, the biggest challenge that Toy Bank was having is obviously they were calling us in to build out a couple of their materials, etc., for donor engagement and stakeholder partnerships with government bodies, etc. They're trying to expand. One thing that we felt, which was very tricky to explain, and they were struggling to explain, is make people take play seriously. Because everybody's like, हाँ लूडो खेलना है उसके लिए पैसा क्यों दे kind of a thing. It just they strip it down, and it's a painful process to constantly push them to explain that. So what we started doing is started stepping back and understanding how do we make sense out of play. So our process was actually spend time not only on the drawing board but also shadowing on ground teams, etc., watching how people are interpreting play, observing what could this be, etc., etc. And then one interesting thing struck me. I thought started thinking of our granddads and dads who go for walks. They go for walks dedicatedly down with like shoes on, etc., and they are very consciously walking. And there is this whole thing about conscious walking, like very mindful walking. Apparently, it burns a lot more calories than just walking generally. Like when you're like very thinking about walking and focused walking is supposed to be a calorie burn. Now the walking is the same, it's just the way you focus into walking. So what we thought was it'd be interesting if we connected to play, but coin a different term which makes people start thinking about what conscious play is. So we coined this term called conscious play, and we started explaining what conscious play is all about. And it is about a mindful approach when you're playing, curated with an adult supervision, etc. And we explain what are the different types of play and what could conscious play with children mean. This is something that really helped Toy Bank make sense out of how to explain play to their stakeholders, to their donors, to their partners. And that became the hook which they started trademarking and putting it everywhere. So the materials would hero conscious play. It was not who are we, what we do. It's about what conscious play is all about. So this is an example how investing in the narrative, thinking about how do you make it relatable, how do you make it exciting, inspiring, how do you make it simple, a simple logic and make it tangible. Start putting those things together, and then we start crafting out a beautiful story, which in like along with photograph visuals can be wonder. But it stems in the story, it stems in that narrative. That's the biggest takeaway I want to push out here. When you're working on your pitch decks, when you're working on materials for any kind of donor engagement, ask yourself, have I articulated my narrative and have I customized it for the specific materials? Now, how do we customize for our specific donors? What is our look of the day? Think about how do we make that sip of that chai really pop with flavor. That's how the chai becomes memorable. Now, mota moti, these are the elements that you might have in your narrative. About me, about the org, social issue, org purpose model, how we work. These are not all the things. I'm just giving examples of components that you might touch upon in your story. I'll talk about the sustainability angle. I'll talk about why we need the money, how will we use it, all that stuff. I'm just giving an example. Think about when I'm sharing this narrative in a medium format, whether it is whatever format of print medium, digital medium, for a stakeholder, for a donor, for a funder, what is the setting of this interaction? What are their interests and what are their current perceptions? For example, the setting can be a digital setting, it can be a phone conversation, it can be a board meeting, it can be a video Zoom call for 1 hour, it can be a quick chat at a cafe, it can be a dinner, kind of a casual The informal dinner, it can be at a huge conference where you're meeting a lot of people. These are examples of settings. These are not all the settings that are there in the world. Interests are, I'm just giving examples of what interests a donor could have. Maybe this CSR organization is very, very interested in the depth of impact, the scalability. There are people who care about your capability and credibility. There are people who really are invested in the theory of change or the execution model or the relevance of your cause or the sustainability angle. Now, perceptions are things that they already know or there's a preconceived notion. Now, maybe if you're speaking to a friend's relative, they may know about you. So there are other kinds of things they may not know. They may not know about the organization, they may know about the work. There are different types of things that a donor may or may not know. What our job is to literally plot these in every scenario. So we are trying to figure out what's our scenario where we're serving the child. Okay? Now, I have kept these components in our story on the left for the pitch. And on the right, you see all these scenarios. Now we will do two examples of a scenario and how I propose how we would, my firm would engage and position the story and mediums, etc. Okay? With me so far? Just thumbs up. Okay, thank you. First scenario, it's a quick phone chat. It's a phone chat with a very old friend, a colleague, and they are very, very interested in the depth of impact. This much you gathered from them, whatever you could. And they obviously know about you and they know about the topic area you're working in. They don't know about your organization, they don't know about your work, etc. They know these many things. Okay, this is our scenario. Now you look on your left. The first thing we need to do is, given this scenario, how do we pick things? Now I will highlight a few things. Why have I not highlighted all the things? Because it's a quick phone chat. So time nahi hai. First 5 minutes, I have to explain things. In that first 5 minutes, I will know whether they care about us or not. Because after that, they'll be like, ha, and then they'll say, I have to go for dinner, bye. So you don't know how this will play out. So it's a short conversation, no phone call, unless it's a very exciting call, will go for 2 hours. Usually it's a shorter call. Again, it totally depends on what stage of pitching you're at. But right now, I'm just giving an example. Now, what we would pick is we'll skip about me. We'll talk about the org because they know about me. So we don't have to talk about you. Right? We talk about the org. They know about the topic. So we don't need to talk about the social issue that much because they know. So if you're going to talk about the education crisis when they are invested in the education space, it's a waste of time. So you'd rather jump to like what your model is, how you're working, what are the stories of change. Why stories of change? Because that's nice examples of impact, the depth of impact. So heroing that is going to make sense, right? So we've picked a few things. Now, how do we order them? Now, this is how we'll organize them. Now, I'm going to go back one slide. So if you see the organizing, you see an arrow next to stories of change. I have bumped that up in the flow. So earlier, we'll go back one second. Earlier, stories of change was much lower in the list. But we're like, nee, aage layenge. Why would we bring it earlier? Okay, now this is the earlier scenario. You see stories of change as fourth highlighted cell, but we want to bump it up. Why do we want to bump it up? Because it's a quick phone chat. I want to jump right into the impact. I will give a quick org intro. My org does this. For example, 3 months back, this is what happened in this space. This is the kind of collaboration we ended up doing. This is the impact happened. I will give quickly stories and then step back and say, so basically our model is about XYZ and this is how we work. But this way you get them hooked, right? Because you have a short phone conversation and they are interested in the depth of impact. Now, sometimes you might not know this in terms of what they're interested in. So you'll have to improvise. So the more in control you are with your narrative, the more you know how to improvise. And that's the reason having a structure for your narrative is crucial. Then you know what to plug and paste. It's like a Lego piece set. You can remove one piece, you can put one piece, etc. etc. Now, what is the last piece we do? Once we organize, there's a component that I love talking about, which is prioritize. आपका 20 minutes phone call में you can't give 5 minutes for each because you will run out of time. So I will ratio wise also prioritize stories of change and our model. This is my suggestion. That's because I feel that is going to stick a lot better for the stakeholder involved on this phone conversation. So I will spend 30 seconds on my audio and jump right into stories, spend 2 minutes, 3 minutes, maybe longer, and then keep it short afterwards. Now, what we've done is we've picked, we've organized, we've prioritized. And before I give you the example, what this essentially is, it's a pop. So that's how you pop your experience, your story for that scenario. So when we said pick, organize, prioritize, that's your pop. I'm going to give an example of a really cool case study we were working on. We were helping Habitat for Humanity India strengthen their simplify their individual donor experience for their website. Now it's a overhaul of a website, but emphasis on how do individual donors understand the variety of programs they're doing and how do we explain the gamut, and we realize that is the need gap. Now I'm showing the output, but a lot of this came from the pop. We understood what we have to prioritize in our materials, and the prioritization was around our reach and the magnitude of impact. So we built like this custom clickable map, and we spent a lot of time collecting on ground stories, whatever they had, whatever we are custom writing, cleaning up. And every state will give you a stat on number of houses built, number of sanitation units, number of people helped. And then we have stories state-wise split up in some situations or topic-wise split up. Now, what this did was, I don't know if I have another screenshot of it. I do have one more page, right? It's just loading. 1 second. What we did was we put this right up on the landing page, and this started becoming the hook for a lot of materials because we realized that outcomes and impact became the more powerful hook for them. Now, you see how it works. Now, this design would only exist if we knew what to prioritize. If we didn't know what to prioritize, we would have just said, let's write who are we, what we do, which every website has. So what is important? If you want to stand out for a stakeholder, for a donor, for for your fundraising efforts, for your CSR partners, think about what needs to pop, what you need to hero, and how do we pull that out. We're on time. We also wanted to explain one more thing on, and this is again something we learned through our research and understanding who our stakeholders are, our target audience. Now, of course, websites can't be customized for every single engagement. But what we wanted to do is focus on the target. A lot of people didn't find the direct connection of how sanitation and housing can change lives because it's very unrelatable to a lot of stakeholders. So we wanted to connect it to more sensitive, more urgent topics. What is we brought it to education, we brought it to safety of women, we brought it to healthier communities and livelihoods, and we showed what that connection is. Just giving stats of how many houses are yet to be built was not driving that relatability factor. So again, we invested in thinking about how do we script that connection in a very honest, ethical, non kind of confusing way. So think about, if your organization right now, what you're doing, can people really immediately connect the dots and understand, your work is obviously going to drive impact. I know what it will drive. Is it an obvious connection? Is it an indirect connection? If it's an indirect connection, no matter how much you invest in aesthetics or like a pitch deck for like a funder engagement, people are not going to understand what is the connection between your cause, your problem, and your solution. Second scenario. Okay, we're on time. Okay, ready for second scenario. Second scenario is like kind of like different. Uh, we have a board meeting. We've been invited for a fantastic kind of people are. There's a 2 hour meeting with a couple of members repping a CSR named of a big international bank. They are looking at scalability. They are looking at how can your stuff scale. They are looking at capability of your team. They want to trust that you guys can do the job. They have a clear understanding of the topic, and they have a very strong understanding of what work is happening in this topic area. So what would we do then? Now, first thing, we can select a lot more. We can pick a lot more. Why? Because we have a dedicated 2 hours undivided attention that this team is giving us. Pack in as much as you can. Now, this doesn't mean I'm completely not talking about the social issue and the org purpose, but the reason I'm not touching upon it too much is because they know this. They'll be like, listen, yeah, don't tell me about the social issue. You know, I've been in this space for 10 years, so I get it. So yeah, talking about it a little bit is great, but think about all the other elements that they care about. How do you prioritize that? So you pick it, and then I organize things now. Now, how do I organize it? Let's see. I have brought up supporting stats all the way up. I have brought up our model and the sustainability up. That's because I want to help them understand how we can scale, what are the stats that are backing our scaling, and our org's capability, all the way up to the top. Now, I'm also going to highlight specific things, which are my priorities. So, of course, my org intro, supporting stats, big time priority, the model, because the model is going to help them understand how it's going to scale, growth plan, very, very important, and very clearly why we need the money and how we use these funds. Because I have a 2 hour session with them, I will explain my fund utilization strategy. And obviously, after this, you'll have to give them reports and docs, etc. But it's a good time to explain and push it. You don't have to hide. You don't have to be like coy about it. You can put it out there. Obviously, positioning it is crucial, but it's totally possible to put it out there. So again, what we spoke about is the pop up, the pick, organize, and priority. The last 5 minutes of my monologue is going to be a really simple thing around a visual. I'm going to ask you to picture a scenery. Now, you see three images on top. The first has two triangles, one circle, and the next one has a little more kind of detail, and the third one has ocean, cloud, circle, everything. But all three suggest scenery. Yes or no? With that abstract two triangles and one circle, you still see a scenery. Our narrative and what we are trying to communicate, no matter which medium we choose, no matter what kind of material we choose, has to hold on to the core components of what we represent. So if you work backwards, say if you only had the rightmost visual and you're like, अच्छा थोड़ा चीज निकालना है, एक mountain निकाल दो, water निकाल दो. But then it might maybe deceive a lot of like the structure. So you need to not just randomly remove things, you need to know what you want to remove so that the scenery component is still intact. What I'm trying to say is when you have a long format document, you have a lot of time explaining the program, the stats, the details. But the moment somebody asks you to strip it down and put it in an email in a paragraph, everybody panics because we don't know what to drop because every component is important. So if you see the rightmost thing, you'll be like, oh no, but I can't explain the clouds. Oh no, but I can't talk about the water. It's a very important part of my scenery. But if you're trying to talk about scenery, if you're able to connect the dots and show them scenery with two triangles or circles, that's what matters in an elevator pitch. So if you waste time putting all these other things, it's going to be a too much overload of information. Think about what's the medium of communication, obviously the scenario that you have, the situation, and how do you customize the narrative as well as your material. What information from your narrative goes into those materials? I'm going to give you a simple example of how a deck would play out. This is a basic understanding. In a situation where I know which one I've picked, how I've organized, how I prioritize, then I'll know how to moti break down the slides. Now, if you're ever building a pitch deck, if you're going to start with the blank slides, your brain's going to go crazy. You're going to panic and you're going to probably not know how to end it. The other way of doing it is you might actually start working with an existing deck, but you'll keep trying to adjust current slides, and you'll always end up hitting some sort of roadblock. So, good practice is step back from your deck. Don't touch your Google slides, PPT slides. Think about what your flow is, how you're picking, organizing, and prioritizing components, and does the deck flow like that when you're pitching it? And then start making adjustments to your deck. That way, you have a zoom out control of your deck. You're not panicking, you're not hung up in one slide and you're like, ye nahi ho raha, ye nahi ho raha. You can step back and think of how the whole flow is playing out. Now, for some slides, you might need more, sorry, some information, you might need more slides. Like, for example, infographics, like a graph or something. You might need 4, 5 slides or maybe 10 slides, depending on what kind of information you're sharing. That's a different situation. Overall, know how you're emphasizing and prioritizing information. The last piece I want to talk about when you're structuring any kind of material, mainly your pitch deck, there are two ways of approaching a pitch deck. Are you presenting this deck or are you sending it in an email for them to read? It will completely change the way you design the deck, and it is important for you to know the difference. Sometimes you want to run the same deck, I understand, because you don't have time. But if predominantly you're sending a deck to them, you have to write the information differently. For example, this is a Womanities deck slide. This talks about their two-track hybrid model. Okay? Now, the two-track hybrid model has an explanation for track 1 and track 2. And there is a proper paragraph. This information right now, when I'm talking to you guys, you may not be able to read the whole thing because there's a lot of information. So if I'm actually describing a two-track model right now, presenting it to you guys, I would position it like this. My next slide is not loading. Give it a minute. I would say we have a hybrid two-track model. Track 1, scale and strengthen existing programs through funding and strategic support. Track 2, develop pilot, da 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 da. Track 1 is all about da 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 da. Track 2 is all about da 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 da. So right now you're hooked onto the slide because you see arrow, arrow, tam, tam, two pieces. In the previous one, you just saw chunks of paragraphs. If you had to read it at your own pace, if I send this on an email, this slide is more relevant to you than this slide. If I send this slide to you, you'll be like, but explain nahi kiya aapne kuch bhi. But if I send you this slide and you're aram se reading it on your presentation, on your deck, on your email, you will spend time understanding track 1 kya hai, track 2 kya hai. That's the difference on how your decks need to be laid out. When you go back after this session, stare at your deck, look at your pitch decks, etc. Think about how you're going about the presentation. Do you end up predominantly pitching it or do you send it? If you are doing both, I would strongly advise, at least if not the whole deck, think of how to strengthen some pieces in your deck and customize it for the sending it to them. Or ulta, if you feel like some slides are too dense, strip it down for your presentation. Nobody's going to listen to you or pay attention to that deck because it gets very challenging to pay attention to all components on your deck. So that's something to think about. Now I'm just zooming out. We've spoken about a lot of things. bang on time. Uh, just first, we spoke about identity, wardrobe, and what does that mean for customization. I gave a few examples also. Then after that, we jumped into the identity. We spoke about what a brand consolidation would look like and what your narrative would look like, which are your two key pieces of your identity. We then spoke about what does customization mean. We showed, like we gave examples of Acha scenario one, we'll put this, that, that. We spoke about how do you stir the perfect cup of chai? How do you make that sip pop? Enough. With these structures, you can actually deep dive right after the session this week into your decks and your narrative, because these are the two key components that you need right now. I would deprioritize a brand consolidation if you're on crunch time to speak to funders and speak to donors. Whatever you have, you roll with it. Invest in time in that, maybe in a week or so, whenever you have the time. Focus on your story. Do I have a clear, concise story? Will it connect with the person that I'm speaking to? Have I customized it for my next meeting? And one last piece before I pause is our pitch can always be better. And the practice, I when I work with an organization, we don't leave it at yellow pitch deck by. We actually sit on a whole cycle of how they're pitching. So we discuss what is a prep for the pre, just before the meeting, what are the adjustments we make? What are the adjustments? They have to make adjustments at the pitch. And after the pitch, regardless of whether it was successful or it didn't go well, break down and dissect what worked, what didn't work, because that will help you tweak and improve the next pitch. Now, when I say pitch, it could be whatever stage of pitch you're working with any donor. The materials need not be just the pitch deck, but I spoke about the pitch deck a little more because I know a lot of you guys will be working on that. Focus and prioritize on how do you clean up your sell, your narrative, your story, so that your materials also reflect that same experience. If you fix and strengthen your narrative, your materials can definitely be strengthened without that much of a design enhancement. And of course, on top of that, when you consolidate your brand with the right photographs, with the right formats for fonts, colors, you can always clean up and strengthen your materials. Emphasize on photos, impact stories, outcome stories, etc. And that's how you package the whole thing. Um, yeah, as in I'll talk about my studio at the end. We're working on an interesting program, which I think I will close with after we open up the floor for questions. So why don't we take a 5 minute break? Or sorry, 2 minute pause, just to think about any questions you have, any thoughts you have,
Harish,
and
sorry,
what.
sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
Harish, I'll just take 2 minutes to also talk
Oh
about
yeah, yeah, yeah. Please. Yes.
because
Go
I
ahead.
think that's critical. So, first of all, thank you so much, Harish. I think this is one of the most detailed and well articulated sessions I've been part of as part of communication. So, I just will take 5 minutes to talk about the next session that we are planning. So, while I think all of this is good, until we really get our hands dirty, this is not going to happen, and we are all aware of it. So what we're actually planning to do is do a closed door session. I mean, with CSR experts, right? So where you get an opportunity to do like mock pitching to some of the CSR experts. Just a note: this is not going to be a real fundraising pitch, but these are experts who really want to give their time and give their feedback to NGOs who are pitching. So, Ashwini, can you just pull up that one slide? Why I'm saying this is I just want to gauge the interest and see how many of you are on for it. Accordingly, we'll kind of plan for the session, right? So the plan is that based on what Harish spoke today, we would request all of you to kind of create a version, a slide deck. So I'll send the details over email. So we would want you to kind of send a slide deck to us based on today's session by, like, let's say June 6th. We have said 4th June, so maybe we can extend it maximum to June 6th, right? So that becomes a confirmation in terms of you are in for the closed door session. And once you have given us the pitch deck, we'll just look for completion from our end, just make sure all the relevant elements are there. And we understand it's a short span of time, so I'm sure most of you already have decks, so request you to work on that, add elements from what Harish mentioned today. And what we will do is during the day, during the session, which is probably will be scheduled between June 8th or 9th. I'll get back to you on timeline. We will have you move into breakout rooms with a CSR expert, and we will randomly pick up two or maximum three, given the time, to pitch to the CSR expert, right, and get first-hand feedback from them. The rest of the people who are also in the breakout room will get an opportunity to engage with the CSR, ask them questions, get their feedback, and we'll all come together where they'll share as a team some of the best practices, do's and don'ts. I think while we all are here to give you some of the best practices, I think it's always a great experience to hear it from the funders. Hence, kind of planning out for this session. And all the people, I think all the people who are sending it to us, based on the number of pitch decks that we kind of receive, I think Satwa can also see if we can provide you feedback on the pitch decks, even if you don't get to pitch to the funder, because we want to make it random. We won't be able to cover everyone. The rest of the slide decks, we'll see if we can actually give you feedback, at least a high level feedback on the pitch decks that you share with us. So yeah, that's the plan. But I want to do a quick poll just to see how many of you are interested, and accordingly we'll kind of plan for that, because it requires some investment from you. So that's the reason. Ashwini, can we launch the poll? I just want. Can you all see the poll? Not yet.
I think it ended. You'll have to relaunch. You have to relaunch it.
Ashwini, I'll just try relaunch. Okay. What about now? Okay, great.
Now it has started.
Sure, great. Okay. So we have around, yes, yet. So we have 63% yes, 34% maybe. I'm hoping the maybe will translate into yes. But yeah, we are going for it. Any support you want in between, please write to us at partnernetwork@satwa.co.in. I'll just put the email ID here, and see if we can kind of extend any sort of support there. No, so again, I'll share the details. We don't want a long format, a proposal. I think the scenery that Harish kind of showed you, probably the one in between, where we talk about deck. Uh, Harish, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe 7 to 8 slides, nothing beyond that. We will share some of these guidelines over email. So really not looking for something huge. And if you have something, I'd really request you to build on that and use this as an opportunity to revisit your pitch decks, use some of the learnings from what Harish mentioned. That's the idea. And like I said, request all of you to share your pitch decks by maximum by 6th of June. Whoever doesn't get to pitch will definitely also get to engage with funders, and we'll also kind of see if we can provide our feedback on the decks that you share with us. So that's it from my end. Again, back to Harish. Thank you for sharing your views. We'll share the details about the next session. Yeah. Harish, do you want to? There
Sure.
are
So
a couple
sure,
of
yes.
questions that had come up initially. Maybe I can start with that.
Yes, that would be great. Sorry.
So I think one question, Harish, I think was how much should one allocate of hiring an expert, especially if it's a bootstrap organization, right? On content writer, communication expert, and so on.
What I've gathered is Usually, organizations invest about 10%, uh, between 10 to 12% in their communication slash marketing efforts, whether that is outsourced or you're getting people in house. So it will depend on the kind of revenue the corpus you're working with. That's a good starting point to have, and then depending on how much. So one thing to keep in mind is you're not going to get an immediate tangible ROI, like a return on investment, because a lot of this is qualitative change that you're making. But you will definitely see it in responses from your stakeholders when you're sharing information, and you'll have to just trust that communications and marketing and like working on the structures is going to strengthen the way your team function and makes it more efficient. So you will the tangibility that you will measure in the ROI. I'm just jumping into that piece as well. Is maybe the number of rounds you need to go through a pitching process to close a new donor. You might measure how many rounds is it reducing, is it like staying the same, etc. So you might see small kind of increments of like improvement where you might have to speak for half the time and explain it only once and they all get it, and that will save you a lot of time and resource and travel and like pitching, etc., etc. So there'll be different kinds of returns that you will measure, but around 10% is a good starting point.
Thanks, Harish.
Please note there's more question. How effective printed newsletters are for raising funds these days of virtual interactions. Jaswant, this is my take and a few people in my space. I think newsletters are now almost like even digital ones are completely like packing into our inboxes. So, for example, a lot of people I know just kind of unsubscribe or try to desperately unsubscribe. If you can see the printed newsletter as a different experience where you won't call, if it's like the frequency is reduced, it's not once a month, if it's once in 6 months or 4 months, and it's got a very engaging experience and you feel like your stakeholder and your donors are very like into tactile form factors where they like to see things in person, then it might be an advantageous thing to have one. Otherwise, I would say depending, like it's a loss of printing costs that you're going to incur. It's also not something dynamic that you can change. So once you print it, and if you change information, it's going to turn obsolete. So if it's like an update newsletter, might have to account for the kind of work involved in designing it, printing it, getting it delivered physically, and the costs involved for that. So that's a food for thought. I would say you can like do a dry run and see how it works, but it's definitely uh, a little more cost incurring process. So you might have to take a punt knowing that. Can you share your email ID? Sorry, that was a direct message. Yes, I'll be sharing my studio's email ID to everybody, so you all can reach out to my firm as well. Any other questions? I can't. If there was a question I
Jahan,
missed out, if you can re-copy paste it, that'll be great. Oh yeah, Jehan has a question.
yeah, I think he's raised. I think you should be able to unmute yourself, Jahan.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks for a really great presentation. I've been driving back from Pune and listened to the whole thing, and it's really solid. Especially in terms of the fact that I can see that we've done all the work either organically as founders or as leadership. Either we go to our mentors and the mentors help us, and somewhere we get to a version of what you're sharing, but not in this kind of structured, organized way that at the end of that cycle, we have the banks of all of those images, we have the three versions of the pitches, etc. So I feel as an organization that is bootstrapped, but works at a, I don't know, 3 to 4 CR turnover annually. So we're quite small in that sense. I don't know. I'd really love to be able to do the exercise of consolidating everything in a way that we're prepped for fundraising for in perpetuity, because we have enough projects and enough ideas to be fundraised from. But I'm just trying to figure out what that will cost us in terms of an investment to consolidate all of this.
So that's a great question. The size of the org that you're thinking, that you are right now, and could you tell me how big your team is at the moment?
We're about 6 or 7 people doing about the work of 18 people.
Got it. So I would say
Like
actually,
6 or 7 people with no bandwidth, basically. Anything
fair
we
enough.
do in this space is going to require new hires and new leadership and all. And also, we're confused because as much as we want to own and work with a core team of people who all believe in everything we do, we're kind of also tempted to the idea of like the outsource model, like an outsourced financial advisory, an outsourced communications department, so that we can focus on our programs and let other people who are experts at the other things an inbuilt an inbuilt accounting department, an inbuilt comms department, an inbuilt social media department. You get what I'm saying?
Got it. So yeah, that's a layered question.
Yeah, but
Fair
I
enough.
mean, like the answer to that, the layered answer to that will actually give me a professional like you or Satva or something, because that's why I'm
Hmm,
trying to find a long-term solution.
right. So the one thing is these wardrobes, the components that go in a wardrobe, just like how we keep buying new clothes, although we have clothes, just to kind of keep ourselves updated and improvising. There is no kind of silver bullet to get all these pieces spot on and then it's a forever piece. So one thing just to keep in mind is the way to approach communications. You can't invest for 6 months or like 5 months and put in a lump sum amount and you're in a great place for the next 5 years. So it's something I would recommend. If you invest less but cheaper way and see how things progress. So specifically, like if you're thinking of like digital media consumption, like social media strategies, communication strategies, these things are constantly kind of shifting. The market is shifting. Your stakeholders have different experiences as you move along. So it'll keep changing. So even your narrative, for example, whatever you freeze on in the next 4 months after using this structure, you cannot use it for the next 3 years. You'll have to keep adding adjustments, making adjustments to it. It's sort of like an apartment where you have to service your AC, there'll be a tap that's leaking. You'll have to keep fixing, or you'll upgrade something. The fabrics are looking dull. So that's the overall first piece, which I'm just sharing, which is it's like finance and accounting or HR that you will not do a one-time investment. It's something that you literally work on building a department or outsource it forever. So so if you feel like you've reached a point where you can start outsourcing this, and think about how you budget for the long term. A good starting point for the size of the organization you're describing is, I would say, getting either a designer or freelancer, not an agency, not a studio, because it's going to be more cost effective. A youngish, like someone who's got about 2 to 3 years experience. Take a punt on them. I would invest in a writer over a designer because that's where a lot of the strengthening is going to happen, and through that you get a lot of, as I shared, like these Canva and all these spaces, there's a lot of like any young writer would be keen on experimenting and dabbling with design, and you can either get advice from other people on design or like over time start investing in the design angle, the visual angle. So start with getting like kind of a, I would say, a jack of all, but focused around writing. So you would look at someone who's a content writer. Ideally, I would get someone from the social impact space because they have a lot more empathy to start off with, context, understanding of how to write for the space, respect for the topic areas, versus get someone from advertising and whatever agencies. They might have really nice writing styles, but they might not be able to do justice to the complexity of the work you have. So start there, either get them on a contract for 6 months and then see how that's profitable, not profitable, can you sustain that, etc. So have a targeted project, which is probably like a 4 month project. So I've given you all timelines for how long each of these exercises would take. So maybe start off with a couple of exercises, add like a 30% buffer. So keep it like a 4 month project, see how that person is evolving, how invested they are. then extend it to another 4 months, and then eventually I would absorb them as a full timer, because once they've invested that much energy, they can start developing a lot more for you. Start there. Through that writing, you can also build a lot on social media. Every young 25-year-old, 22-year-old is going to have a base understanding of social media as well. That's where I would start. And over time, start bringing more members. Go ahead.
I have two follow-up questions. One is very simple. That earlier you said 10% of your budget should be for communications, and I'm assuming you also mean fundraising related communications, because communications covers everything, including fundraising. Or is it a separate percentage for fundraising? And the second one is, at what, I don't know, at what turnover does one hire in like a Sattva this work with us?
So you might have to repeat the last question. The second question, can you
And at
repeat
what
that?
percentage, at what turnover? Yeah, at what size of an organization before you start to think of like an outsourced expertise department like Sattva, for example? Like
I
if we
would
say,
say, great.
yeah,
So the first question, I think it depends on how you're approaching investment in communications. Because if 80% of your goal for the org for the year or for the next 2 years is donor acquisition or fundraising, then your comms is basically 80% fundraising. So comms does not necessarily, when a lot of people say comms having a brand building exercise, but what is the brand built for? One of the three things: either you're recruiting, you're fundraising, you're building partnerships. So if it's 80% just like fundraising for expansion, that's what your comms team is for. So the comms team should not have any other goals. That's a kind of misnomer. A lot of people invest in other things, but you need not invest in that. So it is comms for fundraising. But overall, I would say people invest about 10 to 12% overall on comms. But I would say about 70-80% is for fundraising efforts itself, or it should be, unless you have a very heavy recruitment cycle, etc., where you need to have like on ground members, etc. So then you'll have to split up how you like budget for that. um Ideally, comms is like glued, is like the glue that's glued to your program design team or your recruitment team or your funder team. So having one person doing all three, 10% might be less. I would say you need like a 2% team or 3% team, which is segue to my next point. You have a 6% team. I've actually equated to like I've seen a 3% team invest heavily in a full agency, that, and they've spent about like 20 lakhs for the year for like a full suite over enhancement. Now that's because the founder, the main CEO is very, very interested in the power of design, power of comms, and they have that kind of a background where they are ready to put that sweat into that kind of punt on a like an undefined ROI. Now, on the other hand, like a lot of orgs, as they grow, as in you said, you're a 6% team. I've seen usually like as you grow into like a 10+% team, you start outsourcing or getting an agency on board. Getting an agency on board sometimes becomes a lot of resource and time consumption more than money consumption, because there's a lot of back and forth. So while you might think you're outsourcing it, you might have to do a check-in call every week, maybe twice, which means you're literally having like a lot more work in your plate. So it's not that you can put that on autopilot even if you hire someone. So you need to have that bandwidth to even manage an agency or a organization, be it Satwa, be it my studio, that will be doing a lot more implementation, whichever version. So I would say, like, as you start growing your team and it's a non-negotiable that I need to invest heavily in fundraising, then you can start like working with like agencies where you can have an attack plan for a 6 month sprint or an 8 month sprint, where we can like kind of spend time researching for 6 8 weeks and then start building on a strategic kind of approach on building out materials, structure, narratives, outreach plan, da 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 da. I hope that helps a lot of you other guys as well, because I know these are great questions that everybody would be asking in terms of allocations of funds. And so I don't have a number, but I gave you one number of like so see, like comms teams like could be ranging from, you can have a team that's budgeted. So usually in-house teams, you would budget like about like a lakh, 2 lakhs base price. So that will give you like about two juniors, one senior, something like that. That's a good starting point. So then the ratio is, can you get that outsourced for the same price? So that's a base price. So you can also get like just one person for like about 50, 60 grand, depending on their experience per month. I'm just giving a salary example or something. Uh, Now, depending on the quality of that person, you'll be willing to pay double of that. So it totally varies, mainly based on what you think they can bring to the table. That's the numbers. I'm giving you some numbers. Like it, like in the creative space, it completely varies depending on like the quality and da 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 whatever is available. I have another question. I'm just gonna move on to a
Harish,
few more questions.
Harish,
Sorry.
sorry, if I can just come in here just 1 minute.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Jahan, I think you asked a very relevant question, and I would like to take a minute to address that. So, one thing at Satwa that we are trying to really address is exactly what you said, right? Some of the basic core functions of an NGO, and I'm not looking at communications here, but things like, let's say, compliance, finance and accounting, HR, right? How do we kind of make it easier for NGO? Because today it takes a lot of bandwidth, while there is pressure from funders to reduce the overheads and so on. So this is one problem statement that we are kind of trying to solve, and there are few ideas or few thoughts that we have in terms of how can we do that. Would be great, Jaha, if we can connect offline on that. I would like to kind of bounce off few thoughts with you and get your inputs. Let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
Harish, thank you so
Yeah.
So you're
And
on
Hello.
mute, but got it.
Hi.
yeah.
much.
Yes.
So,
Hi,
so
this is
let's
Samrat.
connect definitely offline on that. And second, I think if you have a communication, you require a communication expert. Probably you don't come to Satwa. We are not the communication experts. I think probably you should go to Harish. Yes, Harish.
Hi.
Over to you.
Actually, that's a good segue to. Sorry, one more point I just wanted to bring up. So my firm in the past, I realized that a lot of people had some killer work, the amazing work they're doing, and then they wanted to have a lot more kind of capacity built in house for the comms work. So we are also. I was just speaking to Mino about this. We had done a round of this, which is called the Blueprint Project, which is where we do like intensive, like 6 week, like combination high touch low touch kind of a thing where we can build capacity on targeted pieces, like how do you build a fundraising deck, where you will be building the deck in the next 6 weeks, and then we will help you handhold through the process. So a lot of these kind of capacity building pieces on how do you build a communication strategy for the year, etc. We're working on that. I don't have it ready, but it should be releasing around August, which is mainly for like orgs that are wanting to work on a kind of a faster timeline with tangibles, but like capacity building that you all can continue doing in house so that you don't need to outsource pieces. So that's also something we're experimenting. And Mino, you're also working on something interesting where we're building an archive, right? Together, like we're teaming up on that, and like there are more orgs teaming up on building like a resource archive where you all can get like templates, more structures that you all can start using. Sorry, Mino, you'd be better off explaining this piece as well.
Sure. So one, in terms of resources, that's something that we are doing. So kind of trying to put together actionable, practical resources that can be taken back, right? So and we are planning to disseminate that. So I think that's on the resource piece that Harish is saying. So we have been partnering with multiple people who brings expertise across different areas. And this is something that we'll be disseminating in packets and kind of looking to consolidate and kind of make sure that it reaches you.
Fantastic. Thanks. We have another 5 minutes. Anyone for one more question?
One question I have. It was great hearing you. This is Samrat here from Akanjati. Like it was great hearing you. It's very informative. Like I have just one question. Like you were talking about the deck, like the deck for the CSR, and when we have a deck for the retail, would it be completely different because the target, the way like CSR have a definite mandate and we cannot go out. And when we are talking to our retail, is more of a touching the cost. So should we have a different deck for that, or the same deck can work? What do you think? What have been your take on that?
Absolutely different deck, but you don't have to literally build every slide differently. So think about tactically. Remember, we had built those Lego sets where we had different puzzle pieces of like different components. Think about what are the pieces you have to remove and replace it with a new set of slides. So you don't have to build a whole deck again. You can custom build some parts where you know CSR people like this part and they're interested in these components, whereas like a retail person would be interested in these components. Just replace those pieces and you're good to go. So it's probably like a 30%, 40% alteration to your deck. And then you have a version for CSR, you have a version for different types of donors.
In that, Satwa can help us in guiding the communication strategy for both the market. Are you doing that for the NGOs as you have done with Habitat?
So this is so just to kind of make the so Satwa has been facilitating this session. We are not the communication experts, right? So Harish and his organization would be the right people to kind of check this with?
Yes, we do this. So we have two versions. Obviously, we work on a more intensive projects where we kind of custom build everything and work with organizations on all aspects of the narrative, the identity, that entire wardrobe, etc. What we also are working on right now is a more kind of smaller 6 week programs for targeted projects. Like for example, you had mentioned a funder pitch deck who will help me build that pitch deck. So we are going to build a program where we're inviting like 20 orgs at a time, 10 orgs at a time, and we'll be custom hand holding them for their pitch deck, where we'll be breaking down components of how to build that pitch deck. We will be walking, the chai stir perf, etc. We'll have like specific sessions on constructing the narrative. How do we translate it on the deck? And you will leave with an actual deck in your hand by the end of the project. So similarly, we're working on like a outreach strategy where you will have a strategy in hand by the time you leave the 6 week program. So there are multiple mini programs also we're working on, which will be releasing in August. And I will keep you guys, I think I'll have like a list of emails for you all. So I will just let you all know as soon as that piece is there. If you all are looking for any targeted support for funder pitch deck. So we also kind of help you all handhold build that so that you all know how to continue altering, adjusting that. Because just us building the deck and leaving will be tricky, because then you all will struggle to customize the deck later on. So it's important that your team member or you yourself know how to build a deck and how to customize it and preserve the experience of the deck. I hope that answers the question. Harish, could you please take the question on alternatives to newsletter, especially in context of academic research centers? Swati, would you be able to just talk about this for one more second?
Yeah, sure. So I'm coming from the perspective that, as an academic research center, newsletter is an important component of like putting it out there for the readers, not just funders, but like for the wider audience, what we've been doing. And I get you on the frequency, so we don't try to do it every month. And so, but we want to still put out like a short and sweet newsletter, maximum to 5 or 6 scrolls down, right? But I do understand for what you're saying with this digital content heavy stuff, like with attention going down. What is the next best alternative there then?
So there are two parts. There are two components in the newsletter. One is just generic, like who are we, what we do, what we've been doing. And then there'll be a more kind of zoomed in pieces on what's happened this month or what's happened this quarter, correct? Which will
Yeah,
be
the
like a case
later.
study.
Yeah, the latter one is what we're doing in the thing. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So for the latter one way to keep, so newsletters turn very invasive because they go into like your emails and stuff and nobody reads it. So one way of doing it is heroing that on your website itself. So you don't have to custom build like a blogging site, etc. Medium, for example, or Ghost, these are two very known blogging portals with its own community that you can literally plug into your website, your existing website. And over time, we've helped and push, I mean, we've asked a lot of organizations to push and make this your landing page
Mhm.
versus who are we, what we do kind of a thing, because that page is just stale, right? Like you're not changing who are we, what we do every day. But if you have those many articles, posts, etc., information, you have teams working on stories, explanations, case studies, it's nicer to have that bang on the landing page. So once I land on your website, on your organization, it'll be really cool to read about these things right up there. So instead of putting it in a newsletter, I would put it on a blog format with images, whatever you want to put. But I can plug it with Medium or like Ghost and integrate that onto your website, which is very straightforward. You can do it by yourself without any tech support.
Interesting. Okay, so you're saying this can be like every month we keep changing that, and
Yeah,
or
you don't even have to make it every month. Whenever it's ready, keep putting it out there, like a long format reading experience. There's no rule that it has to be every month. So if
right.
you have 5 coming out this week, you can just put them. I mean, it's exciting. As far as you keep refreshing that information, people are gonna just love coming back to your website and reading more about new things you're doing. And over time, so Medium and Ghost have these filtering systems also. So if you have categories of different topic areas you're writing on, you can start building all those things, which in a newsletter, the old newsletter becomes borderline obsolete. So it's just going to stay in an archive somewhere. So here you have all that fresh content coming in and out.
Sure. Thank you. That's great advice.
Awesome. Great. I'm a lot of you guys have asked for my email. I'm just gonna drop it here. Harish@studiosubu.com. I would say if you can hit, you can write to me, or you can just write to my mail. My website is this. It's called studiosubu.com. That's my company's name. Where like we do a lot of targeted work in the com space. So it's around verticals of brand strengthening, outreach efforts, which is more of digital pushing the work out there in terms of PR, digital marketing, different kind of social media platforms, etc. And then we do a lot of program delivery strengthening. So a lot of the program that's happening on ground, we work with you guys to figure out how do we use communications to strengthen the effectiveness of the program on ground through better delivery practices. So we have that entire vertical, and we also work on capturing documentation and showcasing the actual impact of the program happening on ground. So through stories, videos, everything. So we're working right now with AT Chandra for that, for example. So you can follow us. You'll get a lot of information on that. I don't want to like talk too much about that, but that's a summary. Thank you so much for your time, guys. If you have any more questions, feel free to drop an email. Or you can also reach out to Satwa and they can connect you to me or anybody else that you need support with that's beyond communications as well. And I will also update you guys as soon as the blueprint projects sets up. So Minu, if you can just, I think the link you shared has all the contact details, like email addresses.
Yes. Yes. So I'll
Perfect.
just also make sure, Harish, that post the session we send out an email consolidating all the details.
Fantastic. Great, guys. Thank you so much for your time, guys.
Thank you everyone, and thank you so much, Harish. I'm really looking forward to receiving the decks so that we are able to go through the next session with the CSR.
Lovely.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye, guys.